Okay, so if we're not teaching with paper and pencil, how do we teach penmanship? What we want to do is we want to start with large motor and tactile kinesthetic media. Now, what am I talking about? That large motor is body moving in large movements, okay? Large movements. Anytime my hand is doing this kind of a thing, this is large motor. This is large motor. Okay, anytime I'm doing something where my arm is straight, that is inputting into the brain differently than if I'm doing this. Okay, they're both motor movements, but they're different. They're different impact on the brain. All right, so we want to start with large motor. And we want to start with tactile kinesthetic media. What am I talking about? Tactile means touch. Okay, children, anybody with babies, they know children need to touch. They want to touch. And when a child is first developing, touch is one of the primary senses. The eyes have not learned to focus yet. When an infant is born, they have about the distance of focal, the ability to focus is about from breast to mother's eyes. That's it. And so the visual mode is not well developed. A child learns first through touching and feeling, okay? Even little children, they want to touch everything. So they need to be able to touch. Kinesthetic, tactile kinesthetic. Kinesthetic is referring to movement. So the ability of the child to move, okay? And again, we're talking about large motor. So we want to introduce different media, different ways, different materials that the child can learn penmanship using tactile and kinesthetic methods. All right, so one of my favorite ways to teach penmanship is with the salt box. And this is a salt box that I carry on my website. And I have right now 2 different colors of the lids. There's red and yellow. And I never know, the vendor sends me different colors all the time, so I never know what I'm gonna get. So anyway, in the salt box, let me move all the salt down to the bottom. You can see that I have a box. It's a shallow box. You don't want a tall box. And down at the bottom of the box, I have glued in very, very well all the way around the side, nice flat. I did not use Elmer's glue because that creates a bubbly, very uneven surface at the bottom. But I have glued in a black piece of construction paper. And the purpose for that is so that I have the black and white contrast, which developmental psychologists say is really good for children's brains to see that kind of contrast. I also have some salt. Now, I do not have a lot of salt. Notice, and I do not want to tip this over too much. I do not have a lot of salt because my goal here is not to, walk through the snowdrifts. My goal is to touch bottom. So what I just did is I very, very gently scooted the salt around, and I formed a very thin layer of salt across the bottom of the salt box. And then when the child writes the phonogram in the salt, you can see I just wrote ah. I am touching bottom. If it's too deep, they're not touching bottom, and you're missing that whole tactile experience. Okay, so we want to have a shallow box, just a black construction paper glued down to the bottom, nice and flat. Make sure it's glued all the way to the edges so you're not getting salt stuck underneath. Just a thin layer of salt. I will tell you, I have coarse sea salt in here. I would prefer to use just regular thin everyday Morton's table salt because this is a little bit too thick, but it's working. It's okay. I mean, if that's all you have, that's all I had in my cupboard, then that works too. So this is the salt box. Love using the salt box. Kids love it. I'll talk more about something when you're introducing that in just a moment. I also have quick response sleeves. These are amazing. When I first got a sample of these from the vendor, I was like, what is that? I don't understand what this is for. It just sat on my desk for a while. And then one day I picked it up and I thought, what is this? Let me look at this. And my daughter is a doodler and she's an artist. And at the time she was going through reams of scratch paper and doing her doodles and her little art. And I handed her one of these. It comes in different colors. It's a plastic sleeve. Yes, you can use sheet protectors. I love these, and the kids just absolutely love using these for writing activities. And they're much more sturdy than a sheet protector. and you use a dry erase marker with it, and then, oops, sorry, and then the child can write on them. You put a sheet in there, and then you have a non-consumable worksheet. So I gave that to my daughter, and she went through a marker in a week. I mean, she just absolutely loved using the response sleeves. So now I use those in my classrooms with my kids when I want them to be doing, you know, we need to change the pace. Maybe I'm giving a phonogram quiz, or maybe I'm doing a quick little game with them. And I say, okay, think of a phonogram and that does blah, blah, blah. And they would write it down, and then they hold it up above their heads and show, and I can see very quickly at a glance, you know, how they're doing. So that's another method or media. That's media that I use. You can get little personal lap boards. This is one I got at the local teacher supply. Again, this is a dry erase board. I sell little dry erase boards on my website so the child can be practicing writing. This one does not have lines, so they're not restricted to the line in their letter formation. Actually, a chalkboard is better than whiteboards. We like whiteboards because they're nice and clean, but a chalkboard actually gives you better tactile feedback when you're writing. So a chalkboard is a great way of doing it. Also, finger paints, getting a big piece of construction paper and putting some finger paints and having the child write in finger paints. Sidewalk chalk, go outside. Again, anything that the child is doing where they're using the large motor movement, especially if the elbow is straight. One of my favorite activities to do with little ones during the summer is to teach penmanship using a thick paintbrush. Not a paintbrush like you would use to paint the wall, but a thick artist's paintbrush. I don't have one handy. And a bucket of water. And their job is to write their phonogram. You give them a phonogram to write, and they have to write it before it evaporates. So you're teaching science and penmanship in one lesson. So the air writing, where they're writing in the air, writing on the child's back, and then having him feel the sensation of that movement and trying to determine which phonogram. They have to really have a good understanding of the formation of the letters, or them writing on your back. Those are the kinds of things that you can do. Another media is Sandpaper Letters. You can go to the Back Home Industries website, and they sell Sandpaper Letters. Those are absolutely beautiful. They're handmade. They're something that if you've got a bunch of kids, you can pass it down. The problem with Sandpaper Letters, they're fantastic. And they're especially great for littles, like 2-3-year-olds that are just playing. The problem is they're tracing. And so they have a short amount of time that you can actually use those before you need to get rid of the visual model and you need to move into having the child write without the visual model. Okay, so if you want a list of different media, there's even more ideas that I have. Go to my website. Part of that handout includes all kinds of media that you can use to teach tactile kinesthetic methods for teaching penmanship. Now let me explain something. When you're first starting with something like the quick response sleeve or the salt box, okay, and this applies to any subject that you're teaching. This was especially important when I was teaching in the classroom, and then later with my own children in the homeschool setting. When I was introducing a new manipulative, a manipulative is something that your child touches and feels and manipulates to learn a concept. So for example, when we were doing math with unifix cubes or attribute blocks or playing in the salt box, something like that. This is something really, really, really important that you understand. Children need exploration time with that manipulative before you ever try to teach a guided lesson. Let me say that again. They need free explore time. The reason is they have natural curiosity. Remember, they want to touch, they want to feel, they want to explore it. And that is just how they were built. That's the way God designed them. They have that natural curiosity. So the first time I introduce the salt box, I am going to give some very simple basic rules. We don't have wet fingers that go in the salt box. We don't lick it. Okay, the moment we lick it, we put it away. We're done. We'll do this again another day when you're not going to break the rule. Okay? And believe me, you stick to it once, and they get it. Okay, so, and also we want to be very gentle when we shake it in order to reset the salt. We want to be gentle. We're not going to flip this around. When I was working with my kids, the lid was kept on it and it was kept up high. This is not something that they could just pull down off of a shelf all by themselves and play with, because sure enough, the salt would end up on the floor. Now, frankly, salt is very easy to vacuum up. So it's not a big deal. It's not going to stain my carpet. It's not a problem. Okay. Do not use sugar. Do not use sugar. You want to use salt. Okay. So I just teach some very, very simple rules, and then I let the child play. We would spend the entire month of September having our math time was free explore time. So I would have different stations around the room, and today you're going to work on Unifix cubes, and they would sit down and they would just play, because they needed to experiment. They needed to experience that manipulative with child-free play. Then, after they'd had enough of that experience, then I could come in and I could do a guided lesson using that manipulative, and all that touchy-feely, gotta explore, they'd kind of gotten that out of their system. So now they were ready to listen, and they were able to learn with my lesson for how I was going to use that manipulative. So anytime you're using something like a salt box, sidewalk chalk, anything like that, let them play with it first. This is not disobedience. If you introduce something like that and then you expect that child to sit there and listen to you and do exactly what you know what, and they're wanting to touch and feel, it's not an issue of disobedience. It's an issue of you're not understanding the developmental nature of that child and how that child needs to touch and explore before they can listen to you. Okay, that's natural curiosity.